Hi, this is Kit with Scrapbook Warehouse, and today we're going to do a watercolor birthday card for that special little girl in your life. First off, we're going to use some Distress Oxide inks to create the watercolor backdrop. I just use my spritzer and a paintbrush, and I go ahead and lay down some salty ocean. I always have a spare piece of cardstock at my side to sort of judge how deep the color is going to be. This is going to look really messy when you first start it. It's not going to look that exciting, but it looks great once it's finished. I use my heat gun to set that color because then I'm going to move on to peacock feathers. Sometimes when you use your heat gun, it does bend the cardstock, so if you put heat on the back opposite of the bend, it'll help flatten that out for you. Now I'm going to wet the corners of my cardstock. I'm using the watercolor cardstock by Ranger. I use a paper towel to lift up some of the color so that it's not too deep and too stark. I want it to look really hazy. This is basically my way of making my own backdrops and my own paper. Now that that's done, I'm going to get started with my stamping. I put my stamp down on my crafting mat and then pick it up with my stamping block, and then I start to go crazy and put my stamps wherever I feel like it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I always leave a little spot off to one side so that I can put a final surprise above where my little girl is going to go. Using the same pickup technique, I'm going to stamp multiple ones of this little girl and her present. This is so I can do more cards in the future, or if I make a mistake when I'm doing my watercoloring, I don't have to get out my ink again. Just a few more tasks. I'm going to stamp my sentiment on the inside. And I use removable, repositionable tape to hold my card in place. And this is my card base. That is out of a linen cardstock. Now that that's done, it's time to have some fun with some watercolors. I'm going to use the Zig color markers today, and I'm going to use a couple different techniques to show you how you can use them to color your images. If you want to skip ahead, go right to the 7-minute mark, and that's where I finish the card after all the watercoloring is done. So a couple different ways you can lay down your watercolor is first always put a bit of wet down onto the cardstock, and you can press your marker against your craft mat or acrylic block to lay some color down on that and pick that up with your paintbrush. I found I wasn't quite getting what I wanted, the color that I wanted out of it, so I chose to directly color onto my cardstock itself. Make sure you go really light at first because otherwise you end up with too much dye and pigment on your cardstock. I want her to have cute little rosy cheeks, and this is going to be using my paintbrush instead of directly to the card itself because I want those rosy cheeks to be really light. If you get too much pigment on there, just use a bit of paper towel to pull that up and a little bit more water, and again more with the paper towel. And then she's got pretty little blushing cheeks, but it's not too intense. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the wrapping paper on the present. I lay my color directly down on the top of the present with my pen, and then I drag the pigment down the card with my paintbrush and a little bit of water. That gives it a nice smooth look. One technique that can really keep all the colors crisp and separate is if you clear emboss your stamp after you've stamped it. I did not do that, so I did end up having a bit of bleed with my colors, but I show you how it's easy to fix that. So almost done with laying down all the yellow. I wanted to get it nice and dark underneath where the bow is to give it that beautiful gradient effect. And now I'm going to give myself a pretty bow in a blue that matches the backdrop that I created. Now, when you're putting your pen onto the water, it will actually soak up some of that water and it'll dilute the pigment that's right in the brush tip of the pen. So always start inking where you want your color to be darkest, because as you stroke it across the image, it'll get lighter as more and more water is picked up by that brush tip. You can fix that really easily by pressing your brush tip against your craft mat, and that will flood the brush tip again with fresh, dark color. Now I'm going to give my little girl a pretty yellow shirt, but first I had a bit of bleed into the yellow present from the blue ribbon, so I put a bit more water over top of it, and that smoothed out the bleeding look and made it look like it was on purpose. So now it's a bit of a greeny yellow. What's really important when doing watercolor is to let it dry, because you can then spot all those little imperfections that you really weren't happy with and want to fix, and you can fix those after the fact, which is really nice. So we're going to give her a little pinky purple robe. I wanted to give it a really nice gradient effect, but my brush tip was picking up a lot of the water, so you'll notice I'm pressing my brush tip against the craft mat a lot just to get it to flood with fresh new ink. If you're getting a lot of water droplets or splotches when you dry, just run over again with your wet paintbrush with just a little bit of moisture, and that will help smooth those out. So now I clean off my brush and I'm going to do her hair. This to me always looks so beautiful and complicated, but is actually the easiest part of the entire coloring job. I go over with one color of yellow, and then I start with a darker orangey color just where the part of her hair is and at the edges of her at the beginning of her little pigtail. Then I color in her little pigtail elastics, and I'm done. I'm going to show you one more technique that I used on the first card I did like this. I gave a yellow background to my wrapping paper, and then I dropped little blotches of water on the dry yellow and put a bit of pink directly on there. And that gives it this sort of splotchy, watercolory polka dot effect. Sometimes when you do that, the water will chase away a lot of the underneath pigment, so go over it, the wet paper, with a little bit of the original pigment color that you chose, and that will fill that in nicely for you. So we're ready to go ahead and snip out our girl. I'm going to get my die ready. And using repositionable tape, you can use washi tape if you like. Because it is been watercolored, the paper's a little warped, so you definitely want to use tape. Do not wing it, or you might end up with a headless child on your card, which is not fun. And now we're going to pick our accent color paper. So I love this Perfect Plaid from Lawn Fawn. It is so useful. I cut it with scissors because I want to keep the paper in my book and not have an extra sheet of paper floating around. And it doesn't really matter if it's like perfect cut, because it's just a little bit of accent on the side. So I choose the part of it that I like the best, and then I take my scissors and snip off the ends. I've already cut my card front to perfectly match my base, so I can go ahead and match it up however I like, and then I'm going to use an excessive amount of adhesive because I tend to use a lot of it. You do not need to use as much as I do. It's just a personal preference. I like to be secure. So I use gravity to line up the bottom of my card, and that means I only have to trim it on hopefully 2 sides, possibly 3. I cut off the bit of excess. So I'm just going to finish trimming this off. There is a little bit of excess on each side. Because of the way I did the backdrop with the surprise coming off all of the edges, it doesn't matter if I'm cutting off a little bit more. The top just needs a little bit of a trim, and we are ready. One little touch inside that I really adore and sort of came to me in a little moment is I took a bit of peacock feathers and I just draw one little line of pretty blue pigment. And that's going to dry and give it that store-bought finished look to your card that is so hard to get sometimes when we're making cards at home. So now I need to make some banners with a die cut. I thought about the green, but I used the yellow before and it was so pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and use it again. My repositionable tape, run it through my die cut machine, and out it comes. This came out pretty quickly. I didn't even have to use a metal shim when I was cutting it. It's a nice die cut and pops out clean. So now I've got my 2 banners, one for the outside and one for the in. And I'm going to use pop-up 3D foam squares to give my little girl some dimension, as well as for the banner itself too. So I cut them on the diagonal to go behind the banner pieces, you might have to further trim them just a little bit so they fit. And then I'm going to stick some on the back of this little girl here. I cut again on the diagonal to make my foam squares go a little bit further. I peel off the backing and place her on where I have that nice blue shadow behind her. I'm going to do one last stamping. So I'm going to take the word surprise and have it right next to her face as if she's saying it. And just maybe one more so that it looks complete. Now I'm going to take the Quickie glue pen, which is one of my favorites. You do have to work a little bit quick when you do this. So be ready and stick it down. Using an acrylic block prevents messy finger smudges on your card. And then I just trim off the little tails of the banner. I just use a little bit of my tape runner on the big solid pieces, and the Quickie glue pen goes on the rest of this inside banner. Place it down. My acrylic block will smudge it in place. And I trim off the extra. And then we're done. Thanks for watching. This was Kit for Scrapbook Warehouse. If you liked the video, please comment and let us know. As always, have a great day and happy crafting.